Good morning, everyone, and to good morning and welcome to this week's edition of Breakfast with WZ. Right. Good morning, and my name's Chris, and I am going to talk about, I guess, spend a couple minutes here checking in with you guys about what are you listening to. Now, I'm not talking about who's your favorite band. What are you listening to while you're at the gym and while you're in the car and all the other good stuff? What I'm talking about is how are your listening skills? Yeah. Um, I always think that, we spend a lot of time, talking about becoming better communicators. And when it comes to better communicators, are we asking good questions? Are we able to read behavior? Are we capturing information that's valuable to us in the context of this exchange, whether it's an investigative interview, coaching, counseling, subject interview, all that good stuff? And we talk about and we constantly work on our skill sets of being good interviewers. But one of the skills that makes for a good interviewer is your listening skills. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes we just fail to focus on and spend some time, refining, enhancing, and et cetera, et cetera. And so, what I want to do this morning is just talk about what are you listening to, and are you working on your listening skills as a good communicator and as a good interviewer? I think, and there's a quote that I love, and I bring it up every once in a while in courses that I, work with. And it's the quote from Stephen Covey, The Seven Habits of, Highly Effective People, that kind of thing. And his quote is, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Think about that for a second. Let that settle in. And how are you listening? Are you listening with the intent to understand? Are you listening with the intent to reply? And I think most of the time we spend our time listening with the thought of, oh my God, what's my next question going to be? And we're listening with the intent to reply rather than the intent to understand. So, what I want to get you guys to think about on this Friday as we head into the final week before Christmas is, your listening skills. And are you listening with the intent to understand? And there's two things that I think become important as good listeners. One is being able to be a good active listener. Now, when it comes to active listening, we often get taught, paraphrasing. So what you're saying is, and elements like this that go along with active listening, which there's certainly nothing, wrong with that to create an understanding of the message that was sent across previously. Morning Juan, hey Robert, John. But being a good active listener, sometimes paraphrasing as an investigator may not be as effective as we want it to be. So instead of paraphrasing, we're going to talk about a couple of good tips for active listening. We're also going to talk about, and I want to share a couple little simple tips for empathetic listening as well. Because again, we focus on question formulation, we focus on interview tactics, we focus on behavior analysis. But I think we forget about those listening skills every once in a while. And I've had people tell me, many times, you're such a good listener. And I'm going to talk about maybe putting you in a position where you get someone saying, hey, you're a great listener. When it comes to active listening skills, one of the things that become really, really important for active listening is you actually committing to the listening process, right? And so, a couple little simple tips that go along with that listening process would be, first off, let's display some good nonverbal behavior. What do I mean by that? Actually appear engaged, right? Have good eye contact, your facial expressions, your body language, be fully engaged. I think one of the inherent flaws that go along with an interview process is the simple fact that we tend to be absorbed with that notepad, right? When we're here, we're not here. And if we're here, then we're not engaged with our subject. And that could impact the perception of our level of care in our active listening, right? So we want to be committed. We want to display good nonverbals. And essentially, think of it this way. I want you to think about listening with your eyes, right? Good engagement. And along with that, what we're going to do is we're going to follow up and ask good questions that are open-ended, that give our subject And that communication, give them an opportunity to actually communicate, give them an opportunity to get their side of the story, to answer the question, talk. We're not going to cut people off. We allow them to communicate. We listen with our eyes. And one of the things that we're going to do while we're listening with our eyes, we acknowledge and we engage. What do I mean by acknowledge and engage? It'll sound funny, but I think some of the most important things you could possibly say during an interview process is, okay, great. Really? Get out of here. Wow. How's that work? So I'm engaged with my nonverbal, but I'm also engaged with just simple acknowledgement statements. Okay, great. Getting people to continue to open up, to feel comfortable opening up with us. And then what we're going to do is we're going to respond, but we're going to have an informed response. In other words, what I mean is let's ask good follow-up questions that's related to the information that they said. Regurgitate some of the words that they give out to you. When we regurgitate words, that actually sends a message. I am listening. And if we can go through that process, then that creates a more active listening perception from our subject. They feel more comfortable, they provide more information. And then the final thing when it comes to being a good active listener is making sure you're focusing on them and not yourself, and you're not worried about that response, that kind of thing, right? So we're not listening to respond, we're listening to understand. So good active listening skills become a very, very important and effective part of any communication, but it's particularly true when it comes to that investigative interview and the skills as investigators capturing information, right? The last thing I want to share with you in our quick, morning coffee here. And of course, those of you that know me, I'm always starting the day with a nice Irish coffee. But good empathetic listening. Empathetic listening, some of the value there is always thinking about creating an environment in which your subject feels as though you care. And again, that then ties into our nonverbal. Wayne jumping in here that, those facial expressions and stuff, right? But it's our nonverbal that puts us in a position to generate a perception of good empathetic listening. And so our nonverbal behavior becomes important. And one of the things that I want you to understand when it comes to the empathetic listening is don't put yourself in a position where you're thinking that being empathetic to someone and trying to listen with an empathetic structure to your listening skills, it's not about you creating a scenario of acceptance. It doesn't mean you're offering approval. It also doesn't mean you're there to fix what's happened, but your empathetic listening skills go into making them feel as though they're understood. Once again, with some of our behavior characteristics of being engaged, good nonverbal, good verbal acknowledgement statements, etc. And one of the things that we want to do is reflect back to them their emotions. We learn de-escalation tactics and skills and how to acknowledge things, but it comes down to, are you listening? And when someone is telling you they're upset, they're angry, one of the things that we can do when we're an empathetic listener is reflect back to them with, I understand. I could see how that would be upsetting. I could see how that might anger you. And communicating that way, using their words, regurgitating them, and think about, what are you listening to? But more importantly, what are you listening to when you're actually sitting in front of someone? So I hope you guys, have some good takeaways or some thoughts about today's session. If you do have thoughts, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat section below. When it comes to some of those skill sets of committing, displaying nonverbal, asking better questions, responding, focusing on them, think about which one you might need to work on most, and maybe even drop that in the chat section as well. I'd love to hear from you guys. I do hope you have a fantastic Christmas season and holidays in front of you. We're a week away from Santa jumping down that chimney. So I do hope you guys have a wonderful Christmas and holiday season with your families. Thank you for spending time with me this morning and with the WZ family. And once again, you guys have a great day, and let's focus on those listening skills. in addition to our good interviewing skills. Cheers, guys.